Good morning, soon to be afternoon, everyone. We are live and are launching our program today. I'm John Casper with the Oshkosh Chamber, and welcome to the second session of our leading and managing through our change through disruption, which we're all living with and continue to be disrupted over over the course of the time here. I see we have participants joining us. So before I introduce Darren, just want to remind everyone that we are recording this session, and we will have that posted on our website. So if people want to go back to it, and we'll be sending it out to others if they want to view the second session here. We also have the first section still online, so if they want to go back to that one, that works too. Today, the topic is managing change and innovation and moving from surviving to thriving, which is, boy, I lost everybody. Huh.
I can hear you.
You can hear me? Wow, I totally lost my screen. You can hear me though, huh?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I'll log back on in a few minutes here. So, Darren is a senior manager with Whipley, has a vast extent of background, 20 years of as a managing consultant for Whipley. He will lead us through this session. And with that, I will throw it to Darren to take it away. All yours, Darren.
Thank you, John. And welcome, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. And I'll get us started. I've got quite a bit to cover in the time we have together over lunch. I tried to put together something that gave us a little background, but then will let us get into something practical as well on that topic of managing change, and especially the change around innovation. So. All right, so this is just a little bit of an introduction. I spend most of my time helping companies and organizations really across the country manage through change or the implementation of strategies or redesign or innovation, and what that means to both the organization as far as its systems and processes, and we've got teams that work in that area. But then I also spend time helping manage that people side of change, and communication and those type of things. So it's an interesting role. It's a privilege I have to get to work in this space, and I love it. And I also get to work with a lot of different companies and organizations, for-profits, nonprofits, manufacturers, foundations, trade associations. I work in a lot of areas, but it's what's neat about it is how common or familiar the challenges are around dealing with change and rapid change, and especially this disruption that we've been forced through as a planet around COVID-19 and responding to the crisis. So that's very it's in a big ubiquitous level of change response across all of these industries. So really neat stuff. Couple things. I do have from an educational standpoint, a fairly broad background. From a professional standpoint, I spent a lot of time in, as John said, in management consulting and in IT management and governance. So working in IT director and CIO or IT leader roles, and then participating in the implementation of strategies in those roles. I guess my bio said 20 years. I guess it's up to 25 now. As far as change, I keep getting older, which is what you can see in this picture of me at the age of 16, and then you can see me now. So I am not at Kapalua Bay in Maui right now. I am actually in a hotel room, and the surroundings were a lot less appealing. So I changed my background, which Zoom lets us do. So an interesting bit of change there. So anyway, though, but people change, and that's the important concept that we're gonna talk about today, and we're gonna weave that into how do we innovate, and how do we manage through change with not only just a survival type of mentality, which is fine, but better yet, how do we go through a change and emerge to thrive, and that's really what we're shooting for. So I'll start out with just those elements of change and how they relate to innovation. And then I'm going to take you through taking a look at those key components of a change management effort. And that's actually a lot of the time we're going to spend together today over lunch. And I want to give you some practical things along with the theory. So stuff that you can take with you. And then also we're going to finish up talking about resistance to change and how to move through those factors, because that's the benefit of going through a change lies on the other side of managing resistance. And sometimes we don't always do that very well as companies or as groups of people, is to manage the pushback that we get around change. And so I'm going to finish up with that. The PDF of the presentation will be available to you. And I think that the chamber's going to send an email with a link to that PDF, I believe. So anything you see in here that you want to get a copy of, you'll have access to. All right, so the agenda, I said, doing the overview right now. We'll start out with kind of that background. I'll take you through the change management specifics. We'll talk about resistance, and then we'll finish up with a little bit of a summary. And if we have time, some Q&A from the audience. All right. So I really like this quote, and I'm not going to read it to you. I'll leave it on screen as I talk, and you can go ahead and take a look at it. But the key for me is that change is necessary in life. There really isn't any stasis. I mean, we want status quo, or we crave consistency as people. We'd like to see where we only have slow and steady growth from a business perspective. But honestly, we're constantly acted upon by outside forces, and then we even drive change from within ourselves, and we drive change from within our organizations. So, people talk about, I hate change, and it's, I'm not overly fond of unplanned change myself, and I spend most of my time working with people on it. But it's necessary, and so when we accept that fact, we're starting to kind of deal with that, and I'll show you a curve later on of some of the different steps that people move through in accepting and accommodating change, and it'll make a little more sense. But we have to change. And when you have something like COVID-19 force a huge disruption on us, and it is, and I'm not making light of it in any way, but there are opportunities for us to look for ways that when we come out of this, we can be better in some areas than when we went in. And so it's not saying this was a good thing, but it is saying, as we move through the change, what can we learn from this? What can we build on? And what's the kind of the new world as far as what we're dealing with going to look like as people and as participants in businesses and business owners? These are all things we have to think about as we're still in the COVID-19 crisis, but we're going to come out of it, and things aren't going to look the same way they did when we went in. Okay, so talking about changes and innovation. So that why change, and I mentioned some of them just a second ago, as far as what are some of the drivers for change. The pandemic, and I've touched on that, but there were already drivers for change. So we had a long period of time with an increasing globalization from a commercial standpoint, but then and production standpoint, but then we also had some pullback from that, and there's tension around that. We have societal or social changes that go on, and those move us in different directions and can pull us, and they start to influence and help our customer needs evolve and change. So we see society changing, we see our clients or our clients' clients, and as we look out, if we're serving other businesses, who do they serve? And we see those demands starting to change on us, and that evolves, and we have to change how we're delivering services. And then also just opportunities for expansion, mergers, acquisitions, being acquired. All of those things, are outside forces that can push us around and force us into change situations. But then there are those internal forces as well. So product or service innovation. We want to continue to evolve and to offer new and innovative products. And this is where that innovation piece often comes in. It may be driven by an outside force, but our response is in the innovation area. But all of it has a heavy change and change management component, whether I'm responding to COVID-19 and those changes, or I'm innovating my process and delivery or manufacturing, and I'm changing the way people are used to working within my organization, or I'm changing the way my customers are expecting to receive, their products, or any part of their relationship with me changes. that's innovative, but it also requires some management, and we'll cover that. Technology is another internal force that drives a lot of change. The workforce and the age of our workforce, and then we've been hearing about this and discussing it for a lot of years, but now what we see is a lot of work around succession planning and the design of an organization. And we spend a lot of time helping organizations with this in planning for that succession as maybe their leaders are starting to get ready to transition out, and we see the younger group of leaders coming up, and then also as they're trying to hire that newest crop of leaders and bring them up through the ranks, there's a lot of change in and around the workforce. And then, and I said, succession planning is another area driving change. It's not just owners and success. Sometimes we think succession planning at the top level, but it's also key executive succession planning. So, COOs, CFOs in retirement, CIOs retiring, people in key roles that have held positions for a long time and were a kind of a fixture and a stable part of that organization are now getting ready to transition as well. So, okay, so I'm going to start at the theoretical level a little bit, and when we talk about change, a lot of what we work with our clients to help them understand is just that current state, what we're doing or what we're currently doing, that transition state, that the yellow block of where we are in the middle, and then that future state, that desired future, or where we want to be when we come out of this. So, if I'm thinking about a technology change and implementing a new technology system, I have a future state in mind. I have productivity in mind. I have, access to new features that my current system doesn't give me. I have, efficiency and people working faster and being able to do things more easily with the new system. Those are all future state visions. So this is really what change is. It isn't just current state to future state, and it's not only the future state, which is something we sometimes do as we think, okay, we're changing right now and we're going to end up there. But there's a process that goes on in there that everyone goes through to get to that future state. So when we think of change management, it's managing that process of moving them from, current state through that transition period and then into that desired vision, that future state, that implemented system, that post-COVID productivity, whatever it is we're heading toward. We are doing this with people, and that's the key. Is organizations don't really. I mean, I can put in new machinery, I can change an organizational structure, I can merge with another organization, and those are definitely organizational changes. But I'm still, to really implement them, I have to get the people moved. I have to have people adopt that change or make the decision to adopt the change and implement what we need to have done. So, one of the areas that we spend a lot of time looking at is how do we manage passive and active resistance? Okay, and these are kind of these absolute critical areas to get change adopted. So at the very end, like I said, I'll finish up with covering resistance to change, but why do we need to manage the resistance? Well, that's how we increase our probability of success. It's also how we get the ROI for the investment that we're making. And that technology change, and this is something I have personal experience with. I've implemented over the years with my IT teams some great systems. We've had some pretty good implementations. We've had some implementations that felt a little kind of mediocre or like they fell a little bit flat, but there was no difference in the quality of the system implemented. And when I'm looking back at that, I think that in the areas where I felt like we could have done better, that we could have realized more benefit, it was around managing the people side of that implementation. The technology was great, the vendor partners did their job, the data was transferred. There weren't bugs or issues that made it seem like we weren't getting the benefit we had anticipated. It was around adoption and use of the system and giving people the tools they needed to grab onto that and to run with it and maybe innovate within their own jobs. So that's where, that's where change management becomes so important. And the couple more quick points in the slide. When you manage around a change, whether it's innovation or it's a forced external change, you maintain the trust of the organization. Okay, so every time I tell people what's going on, I give them a clear roadmap, I let them know, I answer their questions, I give them a chance to ask the questions back to me, I build a level of trust with those people. So when we deal with the next change, they're going to have probably a bit more inclination to respond to me with, okay, or not to me personally, but to the organization rather, with, okay, well, the last time we had a change, this is what they handled. how they handled it, this is what they did. I anticipate this will be what they do next time. So each successive time we build credibility. So then when one of those bigger changes comes along, we're given the benefit of the doubt because we've indicated in the past we handle change well in a methodical way. Or when we're asked to innovate, we give the employees the information they need, we get them the training, we explain the why, we let them ask their questions. All those things build trust. So that's absolutely a critical part of managing change. Now, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and move into kind of the specifics behind or specific parts of change management and what's behind them. So leave the theoretical and get into the nitty gritty. So I love this quote from, this is actually just a piece of the quote from Eisenhower about, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. What's neat though, is if you read the expanded quote, okay, and I encourage you to go out and take a look at it. But when you think about this, the action of planning, the process of going through developing the plans is what pays the benefit for us. We may not be able to execute the plans as designed, but we thought through the eventualities. We have options, and that's what change management does for us as well. So not just strategic planning or tactical planning, but change and getting our heads around how will we approach change in the future gives us that framework or that plan that lets us be agile and adaptable to changing situations. So back to our red and yellow boxes, just really briefly. When we think of the organization, remember I talked about that being a desired future out there that we're heading toward. That's the green box. We want to move all of our stakeholders through the red, the yellow to the green, right? So they're all starting at their current state. The trick is that individual people move through those phases at their own speed, and we can help them. We can give them the things they need to move through faster and to get to that desired future. But in the end, they're going to have some of their own concerns, their own misgivings that they bring to the table, and we may not know what those all are or why they have them. It could be from a past experience, as you can see in some of these quotes here on screen of why an individual might object. But if you think of each row as a person, they're going to move through at a different speed. So what our goal is to help the organization reach its future state by making it easier for the stakeholders to move through their transition state to a future state. So that's really kind of the nuts and bolts of change management. Everything's sort of aimed around that. We use a change management methodology from ProSci, so that's PROSCI. They have a wonderful array of material out on their website that's available at no charge. They have a very strong academic foundation, but they've done a lot of work out in industry and manufacturing and in other areas. So ProSci is widely recognized. There are other frameworks and methodologies, and some of them are outstanding as well. So I just happen to use ProSci more than any of the other frameworks. So that's what's represented here. If you got another one, that's great too. I think the important thing is that approach and the action taken around that. So ADKARO is an acronym for those steps that an individual moves through. And as I said, there's a lot more information out there on this, and we don't have time in our time over lunch here to cover this in detail. But think of each person going through all 5 of these steps, and you become aware of the need for change when something happens, or you hear something, or you read something that there's a change coming, but you don't necessarily have any level of desire to participate in that change. And so as someone moves through from becoming aware of something coming, and there's actually, I think, an unaware phase where I'm walking along not knowing there's a change coming. But as far as moving from awareness to desire, what we want to do is to help people to move to desire by explaining to them, why the change, and I'll show you a tool that we use to do that here in a couple of slides, but to move them to the level of where they say, no, this makes sense. I understand why we're doing this. Or in the case of COVID, nope, I see the need to do this, and I understand what the company's doing or the organization's doing. I know why we have to do this. But they move from I know something's coming to I want this to come, or I understand the reasons why, and I'm going to support it. Knowledge is how to change. So this is often where we start the change management process traditionally as well. We tell them what they're going to be doing differently. And that's great. I mean, it's really bad if you don't do that, but really change management starts earlier than that, because, and here's the why behind that. If I'm if at the point where I'm trying to tell you how to change, what the new steps are, the change in the process, the new system, and you're asking me why questions, that kind of derails that effort. And I'm not going to give you the answers that you probably deserve to those why questions, which then you're going to be sitting there wondering, how come we're doing all this? Why do I have to learn this new thing at the point where you should be able to focus on just the learning? So that's what knowledge is. Ability is that you can actually execute. So there's a difference, there's a gap between knowledge and ability. You can show me the steps, give me the tools, and let me practice, right? But it's going to be a while before I'm competent, before I'm proficient. And that's where a lot of the resistance to change we're going to talk about at the end comes from. It comes from the need to get people from knowledge to ability to feeling competent and capable of being able to do what you're asking them to do. And when I make a change, I take away your competence, right? If I'm taking away the tool you always use and giving you a new tool, there's a threat there to you. There's a fear factor that you're not going to be good at what you're doing anymore. And that's what we're trying to put to bed with change management, is to make it really easy to get into that. No, I'm willing to put the effort in. I know I'm going to have a dip in my competency, but I'm going to come out of that and I'm going to be able to perform what I'm being asked to perform better on the other side because of that. Because of that effort. So if I don't communicate and I'm left with my own fears and in my own head, I may think, okay, well, with this new system, I'm not going to be able to do my job. I might make a decision to leave the organization based on that. And then, as I said, I'll cover reinforcement quite a bit later, but that's that ability to sustain the change. How do we encourage people to continue to use the new system, the new process? How do we encourage them to come up with new ideas and get them back to us, or ask for enhancements to the approach or the process, the change? Those type of things, that's reinforcing it. Sometimes we would stop just at implementation, and we really missed what it took to make that change stick. Okay, so that was the individual's change. Now, when we think of the change journey that organizations go through, it's kind of a process thing. You're going to start out with preparing for change. You're going to move to managing that change. That's in the active process of changing. And you're going to get into reinforcing change. So I'm going to touch on each of these briefly. And Whipley has, and ProSci also breaks this down on their site if you'd like to get more detailed information too. But Whipley uses that approach. And we have a set of steps and tasks that we complete and deliverables at each of these stages. And I'm going to show you a few of them just so you can kind of see what we're working with. And that's kind of part of the takeaways I wanted you to have from the session. But think in terms of, this is, kind of a plan, do, I guess you'd say study, act, if you want a PDSA process, but we're moving through that planning phase into management and actually execution. And then in reinforcement, it's post go live, and it's a longer tail to our process, but that's where we continue to reinforce the change. So, okay. So as I said, I'm going to touch on each one of these three parts of this change journey one at a time. Okay, so preparing for change. This is the A and the D in ADKARO, if you remember that slide. So this is awareness and desire. And what we're trying to do is establish that change management structure and create that business case for the change, something that explains, and I'll show you one of these in just a little bit, kind of the roadmap for it, and answers a lot of those questions. And then also assess the impact of the change. Now, really small changes don't need quite this rigor, right? I mean, I still probably want to ask myself some of these questions just to make sure I'm not leaving anyone behind. But you get to medium-sized changes, you get changes, or changes that affect the entire organization or change a critical process. Those, and that's oftentimes our innovation. Our innovation is often significant. We're going to adjust a lot with that. So when that's the case, we probably want a more structured approach to managing the change. Let me give you some specifics here. So one of those things, one of the aspects of the structured approach is having some specific roles within the project team or the implementation team around managing the people side of the change. And so one of the things that's absolutely critical to success is a visible executive sponsor. Okay, so if it's the owner, if it's a CEO, if it's let's say it's an accounting system change, it's a CFO, but somebody who's at that executive level that's championing and backing this change. And then we also, within the project team, create a change lead. Sometimes it's the project manager. Other times it's someone else in a leadership role that's saying, no, I'm going to manage the change part of this. But that there's someone who is looking at it and paying attention to what I'm going to show you here in the next few slides, and that's the change side of this. Okay, so not just project step execution, which is essential, but we tend to be pretty good at project management. Okay, it's a discipline that's been around a long time, and we're pretty good at it. But the people side needs some focused attention. And then team members, you're going to have a project team. I don't know that you need special team members specific to change management in most mid-size and even on the lower end of the larger projects. But what this circles on here for is to create that expectation that you're going to have advocates on the team who are thinking about the people side of change, who are ready to answer questions about the project and to help to maybe quell some rumors or something that might come up about it. That there are people who have that as part of their expectation and assignment and know that that's the role they're playing. So that's why we listen. That's why we list this too. So, okay. So when we think about that business case for change, we often refer to this as a change roadmap or a change story. And here's like this would be the number one thing of the ones I wanted, two or three I want to show you today. This is a document or an artifact. It's often just a single page, but when we do this, and when we as organizations do this for those changes that affect a good part of the organization, the entire organization, what we see is that we're creating that single source of truth for participants, for stakeholders in the change, where they can get their questions answered. They understand the what, or they can see the what, the why, the benefits, the how it's going to be done briefly, the when it's going to occur as far as we know to the best of our ability, and then the now what, or what are the next steps. And we really work to get this into a one-page quick reference type of document. And then as the project goes on and the change unfolds, or with COVID-19, as companies' responses changed, we would just keep updating this with the newest information and then put a version on it. And that's that nice single source of truth. And this is not only great for the change you're dealing with now, but similar to the thing I said in the very beginning about maintaining trust, it builds credibility. So when I'm an employee of yours, and you've got one of these for key changes, and I know that we've got another project coming, and I've seen this a couple of times, I'm going to expect this. I'm going to expect, oh, well, there'll be a change roadmap, and I'll be able to, all the information, it'll be summarized there for us, and then we can, they'll tell us where to get our questions answered, that type of thing. Versus the rumor mill filling in the blanks, which is what often happens with a change is that when people don't know something, they're going to fill in as best they can, and oftentimes it's inaccurate. So creating the change roadmap or change story is something you should do right up front, well ahead of training, well ahead of implementation, so that and just accept the fact you're just going to update it as if things like deadlines change, that type of stuff. But to have that available is that single source of truth, that reference document. So I'm going to show you one now. So this is and again, you're going to get the PDF, which you can zoom in on. So, don't worry about not being able to read this, but you can see here, those columns align pretty well with the ones on the previous slide. And these are just bullet points or quick explanations of what they're doing, some of the why behind that and why the change has to occur. What are the benefits? What are the benefits to the organization? How is this going to happen? And it's not a detailed project plan, but it's just a little bit of the how. And then especially the when. A lot of people want to understand the what, the why, and the when, but that lets them know general timing. And then as the project goes on, even more specifics. In that final column, what should I expect and what can I do to assist? And I think it's nice when you add a call to action to say, hey, here's how you can get your questions answered, and here's how you can help support this, and put that expectation out there. All right. So the other thing that we'll get into is with a specific deliverable here in change management is stakeholder mapping. Okay. And depending on the complexity and size of the change, we talked about, we got that change roadmap. The other thing we need to do is, we want to be able to tell that story of the why and all those other columns, but then we want to make sure that we get the who down, that we know, how all of our stakeholders are affected and to what degree they're affected. And this is another area that organizations often, without formal change management, will shortchange a little bit. They'll assume that general communications are going to get everybody, and catch them in that net. They'll understand what's going on, and we know who all the stakeholders are. And for just a modest investment of time, going through a little bit of a stakeholder mapping exercise can uncover some groups that are either, might have been forgotten, so are at risk of that, or needed more communication and more support than just the general communication. So I'm just going to move into this quick. So the blue boxes are just some examples of types of stakeholders. The important part about this is that you're creating, and I'll show you one of these in a minute, you're creating a map or a list of the stakeholder groups affected by the change, the degree or the impact of how they're affected, and the amount of, you can also, if you want to, rate their amount of influence over the change. And that's useful in some cases and not in others. We end up doing it, but especially assigning that high, medium, or low rating for especially for impact. So how highly impacted is this particular stakeholder group? Okay, so again, small projects, small change, you can still do this. It might just be a quick Q&A, like, all right, so who does this affect? Let's get some input on that and make a quick list to make sure that we don't miss anybody in our communication. A large project that affects customers and production, or all the different areas of the business, then I might have the chart I'm going to show you on the next slide. So scale it so it fits what you're doing, but it's always worth asking the questions and making sure you don't miss anybody. The other thing is, and you'll see this again on the next slide when I show you the table, but you want to identify if they have any needs or expectations, or be able to explain those to them. That level of impact, as I said, was important. And then any assumptions or particular risks to a group should be talked through a little bit. So let's say that I have a group that relies on a new system heavily to be able to, say, ship product. Okay, and so I'm changing a component that feeds that system. So they're not going to change their shipping system, but what the input to that system is going to change. So there's a risk there and extra testing, and I want to make sure that we communicate with them and let them know that we're aware of the risk that we could affect shipping, that type of thing. Not a great example, but it's that, what about that particular group might force us to, or require us to identify a higher level of risk. So it's a question worth asking. So let me show you one of these now. So as we look at this is a stakeholder mapping example, and this will make a little bit more sense. And I like this one because, we gave them general categories, where they, and actually this was a longer spreadsheet. This is a large change. Okay, so a little more detail was required, but what category do they fit into? Are they end users? Are they casual, they use the system for lookup, that type of thing. What's the name of the stakeholder group? And you can see this is from a healthcare example. And so we just had kind of the group of stakeholders. An individual person could be in more than one group. That was okay. Then what's their current level of ADKARO? So we found with this particular client that it was useful because some groups had been involved in the process of getting ready for the change, and had actually moved out of just being aware to saying, no, we're ready for this. We really want this change now. So we would rate them at desire. Whereas other groups hadn't really heard very much about this yet, and would need to be brought up to speed. So that's where you see like unaware, aware, desire. No one was rated at the K in ADKAR of knowledge that in this particular group. But it's nice to have a current, understand their current level of awareness. And if anesthesiologists in this example were the only ones unaware, maybe I just have a targeted communication to them to kind of get them up to speed and give them a little additional information, just to make sure that we can move them along in the process. And then and again, you'll get a copy of this so you can read through the details, but you can see how we captured all these things. And at a glance, you can start to identify medium and high impacted stakeholder groups, and especially the high impact groups, and say, okay, do we need some additional communication there? Do we need to give them a chance to get some questions answered, or to let us know on the technical side what some of their, what are their concerns, or what are some different requirements they might have, that type of thing. Getting in contact and connection with them based on what their impact rating was. Low impact, oftentimes I am relying with low impact stakeholder groups on the general communication plan that we develop, just to make sure they're getting notified. But they don't need extra attention because it really doesn't affect them that much. But I do want them to know what's going on. So, all right, so that's that first part, planning for change. So you think about it, think back to changes you've been involved in. If you did all of that work, think how ready you'd be for, as the project kicks off, as we're starting to go through the change process, how ready you'd be for that, having thought through all of those things in advance. So in managing change, we're working into knowledge and ability as far as ADKAR goes and the individual. And this is the work that we do during the project implementation and launch. And oftentimes we focus in on communication, and communication is absolutely essential, but it's not the only part of change management. And there are two levels or two types of communication, and we need to include them both. And I've been giving you examples as we went along. So there's that general communication that we send out, and a lot of organizations do this very well. But then there's also having a plan that includes some levels of targeted communication for those higher impacted groups, or for for a particularly sensitive group that we really, even though it isn't a big impact, they have a big influence on the project, or we want to make sure they're knowledgeable or that they understand it. Say board of directors, right? They don't need a ton of detail, but we want to reach out and make sure that the board has their questions answered, that if they have any concerns, that we get them answered, because we certainly want board support for this change, that type of thing. So these are the types of communication activities. So here's a quick example of a communication plan. Now, communication plans can be effective when they're very clear cut and straightforward like this. They can also be effective when they're extremely complex, multiple spreadsheets, and we work with everything in between. Okay, so size it, scale it to the project. But sometimes if you're going out searching for templates for communication plans, and you're seeing all these things that look like you're killing ants with a sledgehammer, so to speak, as far as, oh my gosh, this has 10 tabs and it's going to take me longer to fill this out than it is to execute the project, that's probably overkill on the communication planning side. So get the one that meets your needs. Here's a simple one. What's the type of communication that's going out? These are, I think, all general. I don't think we have any targeted in here, but what's the subject matter that's being provided in that communication? Who are in the audience that's receiving the communication? How are we delivering it? Who approves it, okay, or authorizes that communication to go out? Not everybody has that, but it's a useful thing to have. And then finally, just what's the frequency that we're going to do this? So again, thinking through this and then executing gives you a real leg up over just kind of ad hoc or as we're getting close to go live style communication. This approach will keep you almost ahead of a lot of questions, but also, here's one other thing: make sure you build in opportunities for bi-directional, for two-way communication, for a group to ask questions in some way. So even if they, they're getting a lot of this general information, you've sent it all out, you've put it in newsletters, they've had a chance to see it, give them a chance to ask you questions. It's a big boost to the credibility of the project, and you're going to get a lot more support than if all they are is passive consumers of info you're pushing at them. So, okay, and then the final area, and I'll finish up with this and then give you some time to ask me some questions, because I know we're going to be reaching the end of our time together here over lunch, is around reinforcing change. So the main steps in that, and again, we're dealing with the rest of that ability, remember, because I said that was developing competency as an individual, so it takes a little time. The rest of that ability phase, and then into reinforcement as far as ADKAR goes, and that's the yellow circles at the bottom. So reinforcing change is collecting and analyzing that feedback. What are people saying? How are they using the system? What's working? What might still be a challenge? In the case of a process change, are we getting the results we expected? As we're looking at the metrics, from a machine standpoint, from a production standpoint, whatever metrics, either leading or lagging indicators that we're monitoring on this change, are they showing us what we expected, or are they trending and improving the way we want to? And then diagnosing the gaps that come from that. So the people feedback as well as the systemically generated feedback, and okay, so what's not working the way we thought? And on the people side of things, where do we see that people are either having trouble with the system, maybe they're not getting their questions answered. Maybe some additional training is needed because they're like, we just don't get how to use this module in the case of the software, or we don't understand these new process steps. Whatever it is, sometimes we'll tag something as resistance, like they don't want to use it, like willful, and it's actually just a response to they can't yet, or they need a little more assistance with that. So identifying the gaps are important. And then implementing corrective action it's kind of heavy sounding, and it isn't necessarily the personnel corrective action. In fact, that should be way down the list of steps we're going to take. It's oftentimes, if we're thinking on the process side of, okay, so do we need to introduce a new step, or, is this not working the way we intended, or is there another report that's needed in the system or something? So how do we fix the problem and close the gap? And then the other thing, and you've probably heard a lot about this, but don't underestimate the value of it, is celebrating successes. When stuff goes right, talk about it. And if it, you got an all-employee meeting, you got a particular group that's done something innovative, and again, we're coming back to that innovation side of our topic. If you're seeing benefit from that change, highlight that, celebrate it. Celebrating success isn't always like a bonus, or just getting out there and giving somebody a kudos for what they've done, or for adopting the system. They feel good about it, and it also reinforces that change. And there are a lot of ways to go about celebrating success, but it's definitely one that has gotten attention in the past. That's great. It's still really valuable. And I see when I see larger organizations implementing changes, especially the really successful ones, the ones that build more momentum around return on that investment and adoption, they do a really good job most of the time of celebrating success and highlighting where people are doing it right. So when we talk about, I went kind of fast over that one. When we talk about resistance to change, I'm going to wrap it up with this, and you can take a look more at this. Is from Bridges Managing Transitions, which is a great thing to take a look at. But we all move through this process, and we can come into it at different points. Okay, this is that kind of change curve, and it's normal. Okay, and resistance to changing is totally normal. So we all, systems crave homeostasis. They tend to try and go back to what is their status quo, right? So we're trying to get them to end something that's over here and to move through a transition period and to begin a new thing. And we don't always like that. So as you're looking at this, and I wish I could spend a little more time on it, but like I said, it's worth pursuing, and you will get the PDF. But just understand that what we're trying to do is get them through that trough, that area of despair, which is a little dramatic, but it can be descriptive. Get them through that and into that. Well, I'm willing to explore this. I'm willing to try this out. I'm willing to take ownership of my part in the change. That's really what we're moving people toward. And they resist, before they get to that point. That's that lowest point. So helping them through it, well, it helps you retain employees. It helps you get the ROI on the investment you've made in the change, and it helps adoption. So, okay, so a couple quick points before I entertain a few questions. What does resistance look or sound like? These are some of the things you hear. We tried it in 2010, and then we tried it again in 2015. It was sure not going to work in 2020. That's the these all can be addressed, and they're all really normal. So it's give me more detail as an example. Well, sometimes there's people who they just need a few more facts, and then they can get on board. Other times there's people who keep asking for more detail as a way to kind of slow it down, or to frustrate the change team. I always assume it's the former. I always assume that they just need a little more detail until it becomes apparent that no matter what I tell them, they're always going to be asking for more info, that kind of thing. So these are some of the things that resistance to change sounds like. The best way to deal with most of these is bidirectional communication, is getting those questions, asked, and getting them the answers to them. And that sort of separates out the legitimate, I can solve this problem, from I just don't want to change and I'm resisting. So. But these are all valid. Remember, we're people. We deal with change the same way. So again, some detail here on, and if you think about driving for outcomes, these align with ADKARO. We want to build understanding, as we get to desire, we want to get buy-in. We want to build confidence in their ability, and with knowledge, they can start to build confidence. The A in ADKARO is we want to be able to demonstrate the ability to do that. And then through reinforcement, we want to sustain the change. Over here on the right side are some of the tactics that you can use. And I know I'm almost out of time, so I'm also almost out of slides, which is a happy coincidence. But you should go ahead and take a look at these as you get a chance. And here are some of the things that you can execute from a tactics standpoint to help to plan for and address resistance to change. So in summary, what we've gone through today, reviewed the elements of change in organizations. We talked about a lot of components in a change management effort. And I gave you some examples of some of the specific deliverables, things that we provide our clients regularly, and some simple, some more complex. And then also we talked just a little bit, I know I touched on that briefly, but that resistance to change. And if you want to read through that slide on tactics, it can give you some of the steps to take to deal with that. So I think that is all I have for today. We covered a lot. I hope you actually got a chance to eat. And if you would like, I can entertain some questions with our last couple minutes together.
Yeah, I think now is the time. If anybody has any questions, if they could, just use the Q&A tab on the bottom of the screen and, forward those questions. And I don't know if this is necessarily a question for you, but maybe you could comment on it. COVID has kind of forced upon a lot of people, just change for survival.
Yep.
Downsize within organizations and that sort of thing. And, as you talked about that, from beginning concept to transition to, kind of a new beginning, there's, I'm sure there's starts and stops along that way. And sometimes kind of the stop hits and you got to go back and kind of, redo a couple of steps in between. So, I mean, what have you been seeing in terms of companies and people within companies that, my guess is a lot of people, as companies had to reorganize, are happy that they're still around. That they weren't caught up in some of the transitional kind of things that companies had to do with changing. So, any thoughts or comments you could share on that?
Absolutely, John. That's a great question to frame it up that way. So thank you. One of the things I see a lot of is, and I like the way you talked about the fact that sometimes there's a setback or a kind of a couple of steps back, and then we're going back through this again, or things have changed, and it could be for a lot of reasons, but it almost here we go again kind of situation. What I've been seeing are the clients that the companies that have a and I know this word gets overused, but a pretty transparent set of communication, especially about what they don't know. And then they set this kind of cadence of revising it. So they say every week they have an update that comes out, or they, maybe they do, say their business was working remotely. And so they do a Zoom call like this one, and they update everybody. But people get used to hearing what's coming up, what's changed, and adjustments to the plan. And so that anxiety about, are we going to find out what's going on, that really gets lessened by a routine cadence of, we provide updates, we tell you what we know, and we tell you what we don't know, and that's so like, we anticipate these things, that's what we know. And we can't say what this final outcome is going to be, or we may have to adjust depending on what happens in a few weeks here, but we'll let you know when that occurs. Sometimes people want to get perfect information before they communicate it. And that COVID has taught us that we can't get perfect information, because the information changes, the knowledge level changes out there, and then we've got to accommodate and adapt to that. So tell them if you don't know something, tell them, and do it routinely. And that's kind of you see those organizations being calmer about adapting to the change. So good question.
Good answer. Well, I appreciate that. You must have done a good job with your presentation, because there's no questions coming in. So I think you've provided a lot of really, really good information. So I think what we'll do is, I know we've recorded this, it'll be online. Your contact information is there. If anybody who's participating wants to go back and look at it, you can do that, and reach out to Darren if you have questions, later, I think I'm sure you'd be happy to to answer those questions. And we're getting some comments about good presentation. So thank you very much. So what we this, as I mentioned before at the beginning, this is the second session that we had. We started discussion about adapting to the new normal and now moving from surviving to thriving. The next session is on November 17th, where the rubber meets the road, real world execution with technical guidance. So hopefully, if you haven't seen the first session, go back to the first session and kind of go through that to refresh yourself. Look at the second session again, and then the third session we'll wrap it all up and bring it home for everybody. So that will be posted online very, very soon this afternoon. So with that, Darren, thank you again very much for participating, and Whiffley for putting this series together for us. And be looking for promotion of the next program on the 17th. Again, it's 11:45. So put that in your calendar now and be looking for our promo on that. So again, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you again in November. Thanks.
Thanks, John.